you're my life.
Do you know the definition of an earworm? You probably do, but if you don't, it's on the screen. In 1972, I got my first earworm. This is a song by a band who is the very definition of one-hit wonder. I'm not even sure if they ever did anything after this. And the name of the song was Popcorn by Hot Butter. See what they did there. Thankfully, that's not what was playing on the record players in my house. It was on the radio everywhere, though. 660 AM WNBC and 770 AM WABC, which were basically the only two stations we could really get out on Long Island. My parents, however, were playing different music. My father had kind of started to drift away a little bit from always playing Marty Robbins and Frank Sinatra, as I mentioned in my last video. And that was due mainly to my mom. My mom was a Janis Joplin superfan. There was never a time when my father was playing 45s that she didn't get in her Me and Bobby McGee or Cry Baby. My dad was putting in songs like In the Year 2525 by Zager and Evans.
In the year 2525.
Another one-hit wonder, but he loved that song. And my sisters were putting on the music of the day, that specific year. Which are these songs?
Lean on me when you're not strong. What they doing? They smiling in your face all the time. They wanna take your place, the backstabbers. I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. It felt good to be out of the rain.
You don't pull a mask off an old Lone Ranger, and you don't mess around with Jim.
The sailor say, Brandy, you're a fine girl. What a good wife you would be.
I can see clearly now the rain is gone. We can't live if living is without you.
Alone again, naturally.
The first time ever I saw your face.
So bye bye, Miss American Pie. Drove my Chevy to the levee.
And prices was still really low. Gas, 55 cents a gallon, a dozen eggs, 52 cents. And you could buy a house. This is average, median price across the United States. For $27,550. Yeah. You're not going to be able to do that today. At the movies, we were going to see The Godfather.
I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse.
Deliverance. And Cabaret.
Time for a holiday. Life is a cabaret.
At home on the TV was Sanford and Son. All in the Family was still huge, and it produced a spin-off called Maude.
Lady Godiva was a freedom rider.
Cartoon, we had Hey, Fat Albert.
Hey, hey, hey! It's Fred Albert!
And despite what you think of Bill Cosby today, it was must-watch TV for a kid my age. If you're interested at all in this content and a look back at these years, don't forget to subscribe. Hit the like button because it helps the channel out a lot. And drop a comment below talking about what you remember from these years. Or any of the other years that I get to as we go through. Major news stories were the Watergate break-in and Nixon getting reelected. Nobody knew that Nixon had any part of this Watergate break-in at the time. That would come a little bit later. But Nixon got reelected in a landslide against George McGovern. He won 47 out of 50 states. There hasn't been I don't think there's been a landslide like that since George Washington, who ran unopposed. The general feeling in the country was a real exhaustion at the Vietnam War. It was, again, I've said this in previous videos, it was like it was never going to end. And our kids were dying over there. And it was like nobody cared. We were just going on and on and on with this war. George Wallace was shot in Alabama on a campaign tour. And it turned out that he was permanently paralyzed. And even permanently paralyzed, he was reelected as governor. And again, say what you will about him, he was very much against the integration of schools, actually stood in the way of black students getting into his schools. But he kind of changed his ways of thinking after this incident. So, and at the Munich Olympics, there was a terrorist attack. 11 Israeli athletes were killed. Ultimately, all of the terrorists were also killed. But it was the worst incident to ever occur at an Olympics. In Washington, the women's rights and ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, was starting to gain steam, with Gloria Steinem specifically at the helm. Pocket calculators were introduced. Super high-tech stuff, right? And at home, you had a little game that you could only go to the arcades to play before, called Pong. By Atari. This was Atari's first release for home use, and I had it. I got it for Christmas that year. And it was like it was the coolest thing in the world, man. I mean, playing basically table tennis on your TV. The end of 1972 kind of was the start of a couple of really bad years for me. Because at the end of 1972, I went into junior high school, which is how Lindenhurst had it laid out. You did 1st through 6th grade in the elementary school. You did 7th and 8th grade at junior high school. And then you did 9th through 12th at the high school. My 2 years at the junior high school were miserable. And I'll talk about that in upcoming videos, but I think the biggest thing that contributed to that, let's face it, like most other kids that age at that time, I was scared of my father. Now, I don't want to indicate at all that he was abusive. He was not. Okay? But he had a temper. And going into junior high school, my father made it abundantly clear that I was never, ever, ever to get in trouble by fighting. If I got in trouble fighting, basically my life was over. Well, I took that to heart, and I became very, very passive. And I can tell you that going into junior high school at that time, being passive was not good for you. So, in the upcoming videos for 73 and 74, I'll talk a little bit more about that, my junior high school years. But 72, I kind of remember as a pretty good year. It was my last year in Albany Avenue Elementary School, and I kind of was starting to become acclimated to the Long Island experience after having spent my first 8 years in Brooklyn. I think the biggest difference between Brooklyn and Long Island was if you went out on the street in Brooklyn, there was always somebody out there hanging out. Be it my buddy Peachy, Matthew from down the block, it didn't matter. Somebody was going to be out. And you always had somebody to play with or hang with. On Long Island, not so much. If I went out into the street there, I would be going out into traffic, essentially, because we lived on a fairly busy street. And there was nobody hanging out in the streets. There was nobody playing stickball in the street or any of those other things that you associate with city living. So I kind of became, for lack of a better term, a lone wolf. I would spend long hours in my room listening to music, or just out in my pretty large backyard, just hanging out, playing with my G.I. Joes. Yeah, that was about it. And so I didn't really have much of a friend circle. I did start to get into Little League Baseball because my father was a coach, or became a coach, when I joined. And my father was also the first person to have 2 females as his assistant coaches. My sister Jeannie and her friend Dorothy. And we did pretty good. We were a pretty good team. And that's my story of 72. I'm Felix Gomes, and this is the story of my life.